So pyramids, pyramids exist on the planet in so many locations. I think I once read that there are, to effect, something like 10,000 pyramids on this planet, which is just an outrageous number when you consider the kinds of resources required to actually build them. You know, if you look at, let's say, the Giza pyramid, I think there's something like 2.4 million blocks or something that comprise this pyramid. And if you think about how that pyramid could possibly be constructed of those 2.4 million blocks, it would seem to me that at least 10% of those blocks would be of a different shape. You know, you could have a block which is, you know, next to another block which is probably relatively the same shape. But pretty soon you're starting to get a different angle, really quickly, in fact, because the pyramid dimensions are made to millimeter dimensions. So you've got maybe 10% of the blocks are, in fact, unique in terms of their shape. So you've got 250,000 unique shapes. And those are all made to millimeter dimensions. Now, how on earth does a culture produce something that is like, if you to run an order sheet for 250,000 different types, different dimensions of blocks, and then to put them all together in this shape called a pyramid, it's an astonishing amount of social resources dedicated to building these pyramids. And you say, well, you know, the only, let's say, rationale that I can understand for a society dedicating resources like that is that those pyramids do something to forward the primary agenda of that society. And let's say in the kind of like the modern West here, we have, you know, we put a lot of societal resources into military technology, and that military technology anchors the power base of the country or countries in question, and for the US, anchors the US's power as the primary power on the planet. And that carries all sorts of ramifications and entails considerable benefits for the United States, including, you know, it can basically charge an empire tax on its subjects, which, you know, so it is kind of an empire. But this is all due to the fact that it spends all this money and all this time and all these societal resources chasing down these military scientific technologies. Fair enough. So pyramids, if we go back to when the pyramids were built, don't know when they were built, but for sure it was in the tens of thousands of years ago, you have a society that is dedicating considerable resources, just like the modern society is, like the modern United States with its, who knows, $1.5 trillion a year, or whatever they spend, whatever is the true number. They're spending this on building pyramids, and so the question becomes why? What is going on here? This is not merely something that is some passing show for some set of kings or pharaohs or leaders or whatever to you know, give them an image in the backdrop of a photo op or whatever might be happening there. There must be something that those pyramids are doing that is considered to be of such a high benefit that there would be those kinds of resources spent. And the interesting thing about the pyramids, again, is that the pyramids, what I mean by the pyramids is just all the pyramids around the planet, the 10,000 of them or however many there are, is that they're everywhere. And so all cultures, evidently, were dedicated to building what I will then now call this technology, this pyramid technology. So I've been kind of like toying with pyramids for a while, for many years, and I've noticed some effects, and I've just recently in the last year or so, maybe 2 years, have spent considerably more time and energy trying to understand what pyramids are and how they operate. I'll give you a kind of a roundabout explanation of kind of what I think they're doing. And that explanation is going to involve a dip into Tesla technology, so that we can, from that perspective, understand a notion about the way I think this universe and material reality works, and we can get there by the example that I can draw using Tesla technology. And then we're going to jump over to pyramids to try to kind of see if we can understand kind of what pyramid technology is doing. If you look at matter, and pyramids are made of matter, if you look at matter, matter is a polarity. And as a polarity, it's a, basically a plus surrounded by a minus. So it's a spatially separated, polarized phenomenon. All matter is polarity as such. There is no matter that we understand that is not. There is, let's say, a neutron, which in its description has a vibratory frequency, and that vibratory frequency vibrates between plus and minus, giving it apparent mass or apparent, qualities that are defined spatially. So even a neutron is defined as a polarity, and a neutron, in the way it operates, is polar to regular matter, the way it operates. So within that kind of broader circle also, all matter is a polarity. So we begin with that proposition. Let's go to Tesla coils, and a Tesla coil operates on the basis of polarity. And I will describe that a little bit further, but let me first reference a paper that was written by a electrical engineer in Germany. His name is Konstantin Mail. And what Mail did was he devised an experiment where he set up two Tesla coils that were separated by something like 6 feet or something, and they were connected in a configuration by a certain wire. And what he on one of the Tesla coils, on the coil part, on the flat coil, he put some peas, and on the other coil he put a growth hormone that has been developed through agricultural science for growing these peas. And so he put the growth hormone on one coil, put the peas on another coil, flipped a switch, turned it off, and he compared then the growth of these peas to the growth of a control, which was outside of the area and not affected by this electrical configuration. And lo and behold, the peas that were part of the experiment grew much quicker and to a greater extent with statistical significance compared to the control. So what you have in this experiment, and this was written up in a peer-reviewed article, what you have is a demonstration that there is what could be called a waveform reality to anything that we consider particulate. So particulate as, let's say, my body, or as, your camera gear or whatever else. Anything that is particulate, then we could say from this experiment, has a waveform kind of polar reality. And that if you access that waveform reality, you are accessing, in that sense, it appears, the interior of matter itself. So this experiment by Konstantin Mail, and you can give I'll get you the web address for it, because it's on the internet, and people can read it and they can come to their own conclusions. What it does in my mind is it demonstrates that there is an interior reality to what we call this particulate matter, and that reality is of a waveform nature, so that you have this idea that matter is not just an electrical polarity in the ways that are typically described as proton-electron, but that matter is also, as particulate, a polar phenomenon in relation to its waveform reality. And that waveform reality can be accessed by certain means, including by what Konstantin Mail did, was to wire these two Tesla coils in in the configuration that he did. So whereas particulate matter is a form of polarity that is spatially separated, waveform matter, that is the interior of matter, is of a wave that is spatially coincident. So that what you have with this male effect is a demonstration of the kind of polar reversal of what we consider to be this exterior world, accessing the interior reality of matter through spatially coincident waveform means, right? And he did this with 2 Tesla coils. I'll get a little bit technical here. A Tesla coil is a configuration of electronics which is as simple as you can get in regards to what can be called the polar operation of electricity. So what you have in a Tesla coil, you have a primary circuit, which is constructed basically only of an inductor and a capacitor. Inductor and capacitor energies are opposite. And so what you have is a closed circuit primary using 2 opposite electronic elements. That is interfaced through a transformer, through another inductor, to a secondary, which is an open circuit secondary, which has a capacitor ball, that's that ball you see on those Tesla coils, connected to a coil, which then is a transformer interface with the coil of the closed circuit. So you have an open and a closed circuit, and both the open and the closed operate on the basis of the interface between inductive and capacitive energies. So you have 2 oppositions placed in opposition, and that's a Tesla coil. In a Tesla coil, when you then run electricity through it, it generates what is called a longitudinal wave. Tesla made a lot of longitudinal waves. Longitudinal waves are, sound wave is a longitudinal wave. And when you consider what a sound wave does and is, a sound wave is of a type of wave that combines with all other waves of that same nature in the same environment. So right now, you could hear my toe tapping and you can hear me talking at the same time. That's a single wave in your ear these 2 waves in essence have combined to produce that single effect. A Tesla coil produces a longitudinal wave that is electronic in nature. And so what it does therefore is it produces a kind of a unity wave in electronic format that can combine with other unity waves, just like my toe tapping can combine with my talking. And in that combination produces a single wave or a single result or a single specification, whatever you have. In the male experiment, what he did was he took a longitudinal wave from 1 Tesla coil and he combined it with a longitudinal wave from a 2nd Tesla coil. And this 2nd Tesla coil was connected in such a fashion that the actual waveforms from these 2 were themselves in counter phase. So that when this waveform went up in pressure, the waveform from the 2nd coil went down in pressure. That counter phasing of these 2 longitudinal waves in the Tesla coils, basically, if you counterphase, if you counterphase a sound wave, noise canceling headphones, basically they operate by counterphase. So you've got a sound coming in, and that sound is counterphased by an electronic device inside the headphone, which gives a net zero effect in terms of your ability to hear the sound. So it zeroes out the sound. In this Tesla coil operation, a similar phenomenon occurs where the longitudinal wave from one of the coils zeroes out the longitudinal wave from the other coil. Now, the question is, in this zeroing function, do you zero to like nothingness, i.e. there's nothing ever happened or there's nothing there, etc.? Or are you zeroing in the sense of transforming the functioning of what is zeroed into, let's say, a different domain? Some people have called this different domain the ether, etc., etc. Those are all, to my mind, semi-suitable terms. And to my understanding, when you are counterphasing longitudinal waves, you are not zeroing to nothingness. You are, in fact, creating what could be called a stress wave in the ether, or you could call it a magnitudinal wave in a dimension that is the waveform dimension of particle reality. So that the doorway to the actual interior of reality itself, to what we call material reality, the doorway is counterphasing longitudinal waves. And I think that's a big secret that's been kind of held for a long time. And my sense is that, I don't know if you've had experience with noise canceling headphones, but they only cancel low frequencies. My sense is that somebody in the know knows that if you start canceling noise canceling higher frequencies, you start entering a frequency band that is materially effective. So that what you are then doing by counterphasing these longitudinal waves at higher frequencies is you start generating some material effects because you are entering the actual structuring reality of matter itself, right? So back to the male experiment, what he's doing, he's counterphasing longitudinal waves. He's entering the interior domain of matter, which is a structuring domain, which means that he can take the essence of what is P growth hormone, and in the combining function of longitudinal waves, he can combine that growth hormone waveform with the waveform of the P, which is then the two presumably in some fashion resonate in a way that allows the waveform representation of this particle reality to then function in the P, and the P then shows the evidence by growing, right? So again, the notion that I am developing is that the interior reality of matter itself is this combinatorial waveform function or reality that you could give a short name for it, is holographic. So that what we have interior to us, interior to what could then be called our exterior, is a holographic reality, which is in fact non-spatial. So holography is by definition non-spatial. And again, what I mean by non-spatial is that if you look at exterior reality, anything that's visible is exterior in the sense that it's extended in space. And so is this externalized configuration of what we call reality, that the essence of this externalization is that you have what is, in essence, polar separation between, let's say, a proton and an electron. You have a polar separation, let's say, in electricity between the plus charge and the minus. You have a polar separation in, let's say, biological life between male and female. You have polar separation in magnetism between the North Pole and the South Pole, but query where those both meet in the middle. This entire domain, it seems to me, is the domain, the exterior domain is the domain of polar separation. The interior domain would then be the domain where all of these polar realities are not separate, but are actually spatially coincident. If you look, for instance, at your awareness, which is an interior phenomenon, your awareness is always a unity, and it always combines everything that I am experiencing and am. So it includes, let's say, my thinking, it includes my feeling, it includes my seeing, my hearing, my experiencing, it includes my self-knowing. It includes all feelings rumbling in the backdrop. It includes everything that is my experience. And that experience is fundamentally a unity because there's only one of those shows happening. And there's a sense that show is me and mine. And as me and mine, it is a singleness that I can't tease apart. And as a singleness, what that then means is that the polar realities within that experience, one polar reality is, let's say, me and not me. Those polar realities are all taking place in this single combined fashion, so that there is no separation in my experience of, let's say, something not me, let's say my experience of you. My experience of you is taking place in and as my awareness itself, as an aspect of it, but as that aspect is completely non-separate from me. So that polar reality called me and other, or me and you, is taking place in a non-spatially separated fashion. So on the interior of reality, you have spatial coincidence. On the exterior kind of perception or characterization of reality, you have spatial separation. And what I have further understood in this characterization is that in the exterior domain with spatial separation of polar realities, what you get in essence is a separative modality. In the interior domain, when I flip to interior perception, as it were, and I notice that there is no separation between me and you, what I get is a unity form of perception. So that there are two forms of perception. One is a unity form and configuration and functioning. The other is a separation form, configuration, and functioning. These two forms of perception are the two domains and inseparable from my understanding of there being, let's say, an exterior universe, and on the flip side, an interior. And so what again that male experiment kind of demonstrates for kind of people who want to kind of toy with this and questioning what on earth is happening, is that you have these two domains and they are effective on each other. And that's the key here, that anything that happens in, let's say, the interior domain of matter is going to affect the exterior kind of manifestation, functioning, or representation of that matter. It doesn't matter what that matter is, if it's P hormone and P, or if it's, me and you, or anything in this room, or anything in the world, or in the universe. And because the interior of this reality is combinatorial, is unitive, it is holographic in a universal sense, that there is no limit to unity, so that what you access through interiority is not only the interior of kind of separate particulate forms of matter, you can access by going further as far as you want, the entire universe, or the entire universe of universes, the entire reality, because it's all simply one in that interior domain. And because the interior domain affects exterior reality, there is a necessary connection between the two, so that any time interior is affected or changed, there is a change that can be perceived as exterior. So anytime I, let's say, instruct from interior instruction my body to do anything, my body does, some semblance of that, and you can measure that change in some forms of measurement that have an exterior kind of reference. So that there is a change in my brain for every change in thought, or a change, let's say, in my intestine for every change in feeling, or a change in my whole body functioning in some regards for any change of any sort of perception. Always a one-to-one kind of simultaneity between these two, so that you have a two-way street where one can affect the other. Okay, so that's my general understanding of matter and the material world, which is a polar understanding of interior and exterior. I've illustrated that to some small degree by reference to the use of Tesla coils and how Tesla coils operate using longitudinal waves, which are a combining form of wave, and they do that by entering the counterphase space of interiority itself to be able to effectuate changes that then can be perceived and in regards measured in the so-called external world, which I can now call the external form of perception. So we have an internal form of perception, an external form of perception, corresponding to two domains that can be called exterior reality and interior reality, respectively. Because material reality, in my opinion, is a polarity in the senses I have been describing, pyramids, it would seem to me, must operate on the basis of polarity. Of course, pyramids encode, let's say the Giza pyramid encodes, phi ratio and pi, and probably, from what I've understood, the speed of light and other kind of forms of so-called constants that enter into the geometry of what the Giza pyramids are. It seems to me that all of that functioning becomes understandable when you take a polar analysis of what I think a pyramid does. So if you look at a pyramid shape, pyramid shape is square on the base, and then of course it's triangular to the top, but it's equally square all the way up. And in its square shape, and because all matter radiates, and in my opinion, all matter radiates longitudinally, which is implied by the holographic reality that matter is, not to mention is something that is demonstrable in terms of, let's say, certain experimentations like the Mail experiment, etc. There is a radiation occurring, in my opinion, in a pyramid where you have two radiations coming in from different directions, from opposing directions. And those radiations coming from opposing directions, whether you characterize them as a spin, let's say, and a counter-rotational spin, or as some sort of wave that is meeting in the middle, my sense is that the way a pyramid operates is it operates, because of its square shape, to counterphase the radiations of the matter that the pyramid is constructed from. And in that counterphasing, again, because the counterphase is the secret open door to the interior of the way matter manifests, you thereby have constructed a technology that is able to influence material expression. And so because of the counterphase reality of the pyramid, where you've got, on both angles, it seems to me that what you have in the pyramid technology is a kind of technology that is the kind of polar cousin to Tesla technology. Pyramids, we know, operate on the basis of magnetism. At least we know that they are oriented to, let's say Earth pyramids are oriented, like Giza, are oriented to the Earth's magnetic field. Tesla coil uses electricity. Electricity and magnetism are opposites themselves, and it seems to me that a pyramid uses magnetism in a counterphasing modality to enter the interior of matter that is located close to the pyramid, so that if you have matter that is either located inside the pyramid or located close to it, that matter will be affected by the character of vibration that the pyramid in its geometric form vibrates. That form, in the form of, let's say, the Giza pyramid, includes what is called phi ratio. And let me give an understanding of phi ratio from a polar point of view. Phi ratio is the ratio by which, if you take a line and you divide that line at one point, the separate lines that result from that will be, in terms of their length, of such a ratio that if we call the small line A, and then the larger line B, and then the entire line C, B will be to C as A is to B. Those are the exact same ratios under a proper phi ratio divide. So that what you have in this division is you have produced a fractal of whole and part. Phi ratio is a measure by which whole and part are in fractal relation, so that you have a whole part polarity as the basis of phi ratio. And in a Tesla coil, because a Tesla coil operates in a way that produces a polar resultant field, that polarity is itself complete, which I think is the meaning of what it means to say it produces a longitudinal wave. So that in a Tesla coil radiation, you have whole and part both functioning in that longitudinal wave. Just like, in my opinion, whole and part are functioning in phi ratio. So that phi ratio is a geometric configuration of completeness, of polarity. It's a geometric manifestation, if you will, of polarity. So that if you have a geometric structure that is itself designed on the basis of phi ratio, as the Giza pyramid is, what you have in the vibration of that pyramid is a whole part complete vibration, just like you have a complete vibration in a Tesla coil. But with a pyramid, because a pyramid is using geometry and magnetic fields, rather than, let's say, in a Tesla coil, you're using kind of electronic components in an electronic configuration. With a pyramid, you have the functioning, basically this Tesla coil completeness functioning on a geometric magnetic basis. So that when a pyramid, let's say in my proposition, counterphases its vibrations, both those vibrations carry phi ratio, and phi ratio is complete, and because that completeness is then vibrated counterphase into the interior domain, what you then have is a vibration that is that completeness vibration vibrating essentially any matter that is located close to that pyramid or in that pyramid. So it's vibrating in the interior space, this fundamentally complete vibration. So, if you say, ask, what is disease? Disease is where you are no longer whole. You are self-destroying. Basically, you're destroying yourself. You're in a self-destructive vibration. Phi ratio is whole and complete, and is in that sense the opposite of what could be called a disease vibration. So it makes a lot of sense to me that there is a lot of evidence, including a lot of anecdotal evidence, that pyramids in their operation, they basically inhibit destructive effects on matter, so that any matter that is kind of subjected to pyramid vibration becomes more complete, in a sense of more holistic, more healthy, more what it is in itself, in its ideal functioning, by the addition of that wholeness vibration coming through the counterphase doorway into the interior of the way that matter is manifesting. So it seems to me that these cultures that spent so much societal energy and so many societal resources designing and constructing these pyramids, what they were after was of the nature of the most important result that can be attained, I think, which is to give material manifestation and expression a means by which it can produce its ideal form. And whether that means health in terms of biological functioning, and there's lots of evidence that pyramids increase healthy functioning, or whether that means, let's say, the sharpness of a razor blade that is hung inside a pyramid, which stays sharp. So it's staying what it is as itself in its own, functioning and geometry, more than it would if it didn't have that vibration. So the vibration is somehow affecting the material reality. It doesn't matter if it's called living or not, but it's affecting the material reality to be the best that material reality can be ideally. And you give me a supplement that can do that, it ain't going to happen. There is nothing that I can see on this planet that can approximate what a pyramid does and can do, if properly constructed, for purposes of better functioning, more ideal functioning, more holistic functioning, more call it high functioning. Anything that could be considered kind of a betterment of the way that a given configuration of matter is, can possibly be subject to improvement through the use of these pyramids. I think that's what those cultures were after. I think they were after a an improvement of their races, and that maybe led to, races where this culture has better pyramids than that culture, and this culture is developing their people better, etc. That's my sense. I didn't have this understanding when I went to the pyramids, and we were in the pyramid. We were inside the Giza pyramid for maybe 2-3 hours. I was dizzy for a day and a half. Literally, when I walked out, I was like kind of stumbling because I was like, "Whoa!" So it was clear to me that there was something happening there at a physical level. I couldn't say any further what that was then. But since then, I've come to understand that that's a potentiating kind of addition or intervention, as it were, where the pyramid is actually doing something to my energy base. And I've noticed from my own experimentations here, I have several pyramids in this house, and I can show you some later, that when they are in a more powerful configuration, they will make me dizzy. And interestingly enough, in their effect on me, what I have found is that my language is clearer, my physical movements are more precise, there's less kind of me kind of getting in my way, whether it's in terms of thinking, perceiving, feeling, physically moving, etc. All of that is a benefit from just being near a pyramid that is operating. So the pyramids here, I have some fairly sizable magnets that I use to amplify the effect, because it's my understanding that pyramids use magnetic energy primarily as the means of accessing what I've described as what it accesses. So magnetism is just, again, the opposite of electricity, and electricity, in a sense, is let's say, according to physical descriptions of the physicists, is a primary description of matter itself. So the electron is electronic. It's and so the what is it? The strong force is electromagnetic. So when you're fooling around with either electricity or magnetism, you're talking about, again, going to matter's constitutional basis. So in my own experiments, I have seen, for instance, that if I put a pyramid, when I put pyramids up, let's say for food, and in this context, because it's a new house, I haven't done it so much here, but in a previous house, literally there was no rot. It's like, wow, the rot is gone. And it's like where, the foods would just dry up, slowly dry up, and dry over weeks. But they wouldn't rot. I had a jar of like figs that I had cut up. These were dried figs I'd cut up and put in a jar and put water in. And typically in that circumstance, it'll last maybe 2 days before it starts fermenting. It's like 3 weeks, no fermentation, right? And this was not a jar that was located inside a pyramid. It was 4 feet away. So you say, well, why does a pyramid, again, inhibit rot? Well, rot is self-destruction. And if you look at what self-destruction is destruction of polarity. If you say that a piece of matter has been destroyed, the polarity is gone. The matter is gone. So that any destruction is polar destruction. You are taking the two poles and destroying the polarity. And by that, you destroy the matter. And so any form of rot can be understood as a polar destruction. So when we're talking, let's say Tesla coil operation, where you are generating polarity through the very use of that device, or whether we're talking, let's say, with pyramids, you are generating a kind of geometric polarity in a phi ratio modality. That is kind of polar supporting, and therefore is by definition the definition of what it means to be actively material. In other words, healthy. And it's no coincidence in my mind that the word health etymologically means whole. So that the grand wholeness of anything is polar, is polarity itself. And if you can introduce something that supports polar reality, polar expression, and polar continuation, as it were, you have introduced something that well, the sky's the limit in terms of describing it, that will be supporting greater health, greater, like the thing won't break down like a razor blade. It won't dull out and lose its kind of material integrity, etc. So I think polarity is the key, and I think by kind of approaching these technologies through polarity, you can come to an understanding then that by counterphasing you enter the grand polarity of interior-exterior, and are able to engineer to some degree effects that affect the whole of a person, which is the person's actual material manifestation and expression, etc. But let's go back to the historical understanding. There's a lot of talk, on the internet and otherwise about, what is Atlantis and what was the previous high civilization? What were they about, and how did they work and how did they operate? Well, an interesting thing about them, if you're familiar with archaeology, and I studied it at the master's level and did a lot of archaeological investigation, you realize that, it's like there's no titanium turbines from jet planes that they flew, right? Titanium doesn't break down. It's going to last for a long, long time. There's no titanium anything in the archaeological record. There's no, where are the automobiles, and where's the evidence of kind of like civilization beyond just huts and some cow fences or whatever they had. It's just not there. It's not in the record, and I don't believe that it's been so hidden and covered up as to provide a grand conspiracy that all those titanium turbines from all the jets that were washed over by the Great Flood, they're all sitting in some warehouse somewhere hidden. I don't believe that's true. So you say, well, what's going on, and how could a civilization generate something so scientifically profound as a pyramid effect that would in my perception of it make matter better? How does that happen, that a civilization can do that without all the extraneous kind of realities that we live with here, which, if a big flood washed over, somebody's going to find your camera and he's going to go, oh, look what I found in the dirt, right? It's like, where's all that stuff? Well, I think the entire culture was different in such a way that they didn't produce those kinds of things. And I think there's a good way to characterize that difference, and the difference is that they were interiorly oriented. And because they were interiorly oriented, they could come up with such technologies as pyramids, which operate on an interior basis. It took a Tesla in our exteriorly oriented modality to kind of crack the code of how do you get inside there. But I don't think Tesla really understood. And I don't think Tesla, he was an experimenter, but I don't think he had a theory that was competent to actually describe what he was doing. And so I don't think Tesla could describe what a pyramid was doing. And yet you had those cultures presumably knowing through some means, how would they actually know that? So there is, in my perception of this kind of difference, there's a mode where people can become very, can orient themselves interiorly to come to those understandings and come to then be able to design such things as pyramids that operate in the way pyramids do on an interior basis. I think there is evidence for that interior modality in the kind of historical record where you have, let's say, the cultures, let's say like Greece and Rome and etc., which were so-called polytheistic, and they had these mythologies of all these gods doing whatever the gods were doing, etc. I think that's evidence of an interior orientation, where what they are doing in developing these mythologies is developing a perception of relations, of interior relations, that bear upon the actual functioning of this so-called exterior reality. So that a mythological culture isn't, according to the developmentalists, who I'll leave them unnamed, but they don't strike me as being anything but chauvinistic in their understanding. A mythological culture is not less developed because of its so-called mythology. No, mythology is a way of interior navigation. And the relations of the gods that you posit, those beings that you can perceive when you perceive interiorly, those realities that you can perceive, however you want to describe them and jot them down in your notes and your whatever. If you describe them as gods, then what you're talking about are relations. And any sort of scientific expression in our so-called material exterior vein is just merely an expression of relations. Let me give you one profound relation that the Greek culture came to. They said that at the beginning of the universe was Ananke, who is necessity, and Chronos, who is time. You say, okay, necessity and time is at the beginning of the universe. Time is particularity. Particularity is something that is always different by some degree. It's always changing. Particularity, to be particular, has to be not same. And to be particular, therefore, implies that you are not same over what is then called time. That there is this changingness, this active non-sameness to what particularity is. So time is particularity. Necessity, if you say, what is unity? Unity is necessity itself. Unity is the state which is always non-changing. It's always the same. And as same, it is always necessarily that. And so basically what the Greeks hit upon in that relation between Chronos and Ananke is the fundamental polar relation between particularity and unity, or separation and sameness, or particularity and generality. So they were dealing at a very profound kind of polar level with polar reality in perceiving that Ananke and Chronos were both present at the origin of the universe. This is what interior functioning gets you when you pay attention interiorly to the implication of things you might think or feel or perceive or whatever. When you pay attention to those implications and you take the inner road of going to depth rather than to some span in some direction of space, you go to depth, you find out those relations. And by perceiving those relations, you can then begin to perceive how to configure matter, which is merely a set of relations, in ways that, produce something like a pyramid. So what you see over the course of history then is you see a gradual loss of this mythological mode into a flip which appears as a commitment to monotheism, which I think is when the primary modality of perception flipped from interior to exterior and gave us the birth of this exteriorized kind of modality that we live with. So that I think the cultures that built pyramids were heavily interiorly oriented, whereas our cultures, which don't really understand pyramids, are fundamentally exteriorly oriented. It's kind of like hard to get an audience outside of limited circles, some spiritual circles, New Age circles, and whatever. But it's hard to get an audience in the mainstream for interior realities because it's an exteriorly biased modality and form of perception. So I think that's the difference. I think the previous high culture which built pyramids was interiorly oriented, and as such, they didn't build gizmos and all this stuff that we clutter our lives with, right? Because it's not an exterior motivated kind of orientation. What you are is eternal. You are eternally that. And so no, there is no death in the sense of what you are going away in that sense. But let's be careful here that the change of particularity implies that you are always changing. And so there is a death in the sense that who I was yesterday is gone forever. And so in my very appearing as who I am also disappearing as who I was. So I am simultaneously appearing and disappearing, where that disappearance is forever. It'll never be the same again. It'll never be there again. So I think the idea of death expresses the actual modality of change itself. That change implies absolute forfeiture of what was. Even if I go back in time, you got some time device or whatever, even if I go back in time, that's not the original. That's just me having gone back. The original is never again. Ever, ever, ever. Eternally. Forever. So I think death is a useful idea for expressing the very reality of what change is. That in order to truly inhabit the changingness of what this particularized expression is, you have to inhabit this idea, this feeling, this attitude that what goes forever. So you're constantly moving, constantly changing in that sense. And I think eternally so. But again, notice that when I say I am changing, there is by necessary implication there something there that is not changing, that is perceiving the change. And so part of the changingness is the non-changing element. These are all like fireside discussions we could have for hours, but there is a simultaneity of change and not change, and both have to be inhabited. Inhabiting change means you get on the road and what is in the rearview mirror is never coming again. You're always saying goodbye in the very moment of every change. So that change is goodbye in that sense. But it is also hello simultaneously. So it's like Impressionist art. Is it waving hello or is it waving goodbye? Well, it's doing both. That's our reality as change. But that always, by its very nature, implies that there is this non-changing element. And that doesn't change. Non-changing is not going anywhere. Well, we could talk just a little bit about Platonic solids. There's this idea that Platonic solids are somehow formative of matter. And let me give my impression about what's happening there. Plato was the guy we reference in the naming of Platonic solids. A Platonic solid is a geometric shape where all the angles are the same in the shape, and all the lengths of the faces are the same, and where the number of faces coming into any vertice is the same. So a Platonic solid, and there's only 5 of them. There's only 5 ways to construct a Platonic solid having those characteristics. A Platonic solid is sameness geometry. You take any other geometry, and it's not the same. Like, let's say these, Giza pyramids, that's not sameness geometry. Whereas a Platonic solid is sameness by definition of what it actually is. Now, if you, let's say, imagine a Platonic solid vibrating at a certain frequency, let's say its resonant frequency, down each of those lines that construct the Platonic solid, you're going to have reflections from the nodes that reflect that vibration back, whereby at a certain given frequency, the entire solid is going to vibrate in a manner that is exactly counterphase. So you get this, what you get in sameness geometry is the potential of counterphase vibration using sound and sound-like vibrations, longitudinal vibrations. So I think Plato was right that Platonic solids are, in that technical sense, the origin of matter itself, in the sense of that matter is an expression of counterphase vibration. And that counterphase vibration is located, as it were, in the geometric shape of these Platonic solids. And I would imagine, yes, that somewhere in and as matter you are going to find those shapes right at the root. So Buckminster Fullerene, which is what, let's say, C60 is made from, is formed as, in a sense, is a phi ratio vibration, which I think is why it gives the effects it does in its form as C60, for instance. Fuller had an idea of vector equilibrium, and vector equilibrium is functionally and fundamentally what I have been describing as counterphase reality, which is a polar reality. And let me give you a quote here from Fuller. Fuller wrote a book called Synergetics, and in a couple of paragraphs in that book, and in a couple of talks that he gave, he kind of gives a little bit of wording describing what he really means by vector equilibrium. Because all the vectors have the same length and angular relationship, vector equilibrium is the perfected vibrational condition in which energy movement counterphases to a state of absolute balance. So let me give you, here's his wording. The vector equilibrium occurs where the balance between positive and negative is zero, right? So you're hitting the zero space. The vector equilibrium is the true zero reference of the energy mathematics. Zero pulsation in the vector equilibrium is the closest similarity that we know of God and eternity. The zero phase of the integrity inherent in the concept of positive and negative asymmetry that propagates the different forms of consciousness. I think he was right. And I think you can combine Fuller's idea of vector equilibrium with the geometry of Platonic solids to get you a result that says, oop, this is, you're entering the universal realm of universal geometry and universal functioning. as an expression of positive and negative, zeroing out as counterphase. It's a polar expression of polarity itself. So here's a pyramid I'm working on here. This is made of 20 millimeter quartz rods, and they're about 4 feet long. And they're in a frame that is currently designed to kind of put it at Giza pyramid angles and whatnot, which is somewhat undesirable in the sense that it separates the quartz rods right at the ends. So I'm gonna remove those eventually, and cut the quartz rods at angles to kind of put them together and probably fasten them together with some sort of tape or maybe epoxy glue or something. But currently, they still are effective, even though they're kind of only approximating kind of Giza pyramid dimensions. I can feel their operation. And just let me add, also here we have a couple of neodymium magnets, which are very large actually. I don't know what the Gauss of these would be, but quite high. So these pyramids would be somewhat supercharged magnetically. And even though they're not kind of strictly in a Giza construction, I can still feel the effect quite strongly. I get a sense of almost like a pressure in my cells, and I can feel this very distinctly in my face. I feel my lips tingling and my cheeks and my eyes. I can feel my hands and my fingers tingling. And often I will feel a little bit dizzy after getting up, and that dizziness is kind of interesting because when I was in the Giza pyramid in Egypt for the 3 hours I was dizzy for a day and a half afterwards. And they say, well, dizziness, I was like, what is dizziness? If you accelerate, you get dizzy. So, if you, let's say, are pushed on a swing for half an hour, there'll be a dizziness associated with it. Or if you accelerate in an automobile, you can get dizzy. And so dizzy seems to be a form of acceleration response. And it seems to me that what this pyramid structure is doing in part is it is affecting my energy, which is kind of like my interiority or my potential. It's affecting my energy in a way that is in some senses potentializing it, that is giving it greater potential, giving the energy of my energy greater energy, as it were. And in that sense, it seems to me that it's proper to say that this function is a function of accelerating the kind of base movement force of my energy. So it's operating to kind of accelerate. And I know from using these pyramids that it does indeed accelerate certain functions in my life, including psychological and spiritual functions. So, I will have to integrate at a speed of integration which is higher than typical, and I think goes deeper than I would otherwise go through the use of these pyramids. So I think it acts as a kind of a homeopathic facilitator of interior development generally, which would include interior psychological development, spiritual development, and so on. I have some quartz rods I just purchased, which are 2-inch diameter, which I'm going to construct a pyramid from. I really think these devices are the highest form of technology available, personally. Pyramids and Tesla coils. I think the Tesla coil is kind of like the exteriorized version, using exterior science, in a sense, to what these pyramids are as an interior technology. And I think both Tesla tech and pyramid tech are right at the top of all technologies. I think their effects are the most profound, and their possibilities for use, and not to mention that there could be destructive uses, of course, and that should be known and perceived and well understood. But the actual ability of these devices to facilitate one's life as an integrating human being is, I think, beyond compare.